Hi, Dave. How you doing?
Good, Elmer. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad we got those technical issues out of the way. Um, that was like the dress rehearsal for the conversation that we're finally going to have now.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good.
For a minute there, I
So,
thought we'd have to do this by voice only, which, for the viewers probably would have been a better thing.
well, I'll share with you actually. When the system started breaking down, my screen was frozen with a smiling picture of you. So it actually could have been okay. We could have made it work.
Excellent.
So it's been a couple weeks since the start of this massive global change, and I'm just curious, what has changed for you in your daily work? How are you coping?
Um, well, if we're being honest, it's been more like 8 weeks, Elmer. Feels like two, but it's eight. And big change, right? I mean, you're used to seeing people every day. In my case, kind of constant interruptions. People are at my door every 2 minutes, pretty much all day long. And today it's different. The interruptions I get are dogs barking and wife asking what we want for dinner, and kids with homework questions. But I think the more seriously, I think not much has changed when you think about workflows. Um, we still reach out to clients, we still reach out to individuals, employees, but the conversations are different, right? Because we don't see each other every day. We can't see what their emotional reactions are to certain things, and so spending a lot more time on the phone and video conferences, and just to make sure that everybody's is doing fine. Same with clients. We're having daily conversations with virtually all of our clients, as you might expect. Um, and so some things are different, but not everything. I think the way we do business is still the same.
You all had the big news for BMO obviously was the construction of the building downtown, and that building becomes a symbol of a particular work style, which is in this moment being challenged. That coming together, occupying the same space, dressing for work, having a commute. Um, what's the news with the opening of the building, and how might you rethink using an office now that our work styles have been forced to change?
Yeah, great question. We've had the better part of 2 years to plan this move to the new building, and my office on 7 overlooks the old parking garage, and which is now where the new tower is. So um, I've witnessed this thing go from parking garage to dirt to kind of a massive tower. Um, it's a curious question, and interesting from the standpoint that here we are in a perfectly good 50-year-old building, lots of offices, lots of space. Certainly if you want to shut yourself out to noise and other people to have meetings, you can in our current environment. In the new environment, it's a lot different. It was designed during a time where, we wanted more collaboration. We wanted to spend more time in pods, um, and yet we wanted more people to have access to light. So, as we contemplate the move here in a couple of weeks, at least for the commercial group, we're going to move. I think the first week of June. Um, we're going into mostly an open concept setting, which was really designed for close contact, and now will have to be refitted a little bit for social distancing. So still really excited about the new space. It's got a lot of technological advancements that a 50-year-old concrete building just doesn't give you, um, but it'll be a lot different. So, but I think part of your question is, when are we moving? And I think we're scheduled to move June 8th. I think our wealth group is already there. Um, and when I say there, I don't mean full staff. It's maybe a skeleton crew. The return to work is going to be a challenge, just like working from home was a challenge 8 weeks ago. Nobody in a pre-COVID environment envisioned a day where somebody else was going to be packing up our stuff and moving it into our new tower. And we also didn't think that when we left in March, we'd be returning to a new tower and not our existing space. So, you've got this whole, saying goodbye to the old space for people that have been there for 20 or 30 years, and managing the excitement of moving to a brand new space that's unfamiliar to everybody, and is mostly open concept. So kind of strange times, but we're excited about the return.
So a few weeks ago, I reached out to you to ask if you had any insights into how banking and financial institutions would change their work, and you were really generous. Shared some blog content that BMO had drafted. I'm really wondering now, have your views on any of that changed? And how are you going to implement some of those important practices, one of which is really considering the need to be especially concerned about security now that so much of our stuff is moving online in a permanent way?
Yeah, good question, and I'm glad you're able to use some of that content, Elmer. It's interesting that before COVID, the banking industry did a great deal of talking about becoming digital. Every bank was talking about moving to more mobile solutions and less about paper and things like that. And if you look across the nation, it's about 15 or 20% of the organizations that have truly shifted to a digital platform. So when COVID hit, everything changed. We needed to move very quickly and start utilizing those digital platforms that we had already established. But to be honest, not all of us were using them. Clients as well as bankers and other employees. And essentially everything that could move online did move online in a very, very short period of time. So, I think there's a huge opportunity for digital collaboration and frankly, transformation, training and development, solutions that are vetted over digital channels, as opposed to face-to-face. I think we need to make sure that nobody's left behind in the learning curve, because we have multiple generations working for us, and as some are slightly more adept at some of those digital channels than others. And so the biggest concern I have isn't so much using the digital platform with clients, because I think we've mostly mastered that. My concern is more about how do you begin a knowledge transfer between tenured staff and new folks, interns, employees that have been there 2 or 3 years. I mean, ours is an industry that you really learn through a trial by fire concept. It's lots of interactions with different situations that eventually make you more valuable as to how much you can assist a client, just because of situational awareness. So that's my bigger concern, I think. Recruiting and training and development and retention during times like this. Our retention's been fantastic, and so the history books will be written and judge us 10 years from now on how quickly we transformed into the digital age.
You bring up an interesting point that in times of change, issues arise that we couldn't have and didn't predict. So thinking about all the challenges you can imagine moving forward, both for yourself and for other businesses, large and small, what issues do you think haven't hit the headlines that we should be considering already?
It's a great question. I think there aren't too many topics that haven't hit the headlines yet, right? I mean, just about any day of the week you can read pretty much anything you want to. I think the biggest issue that hasn't we haven't spent a whole lot of time on is the mental aspects of working remotely. as I talk to our staff, and I'm talking to them pretty regularly, from a productivity standpoint, everybody's figured out how to work and kind of do their day-to-day job. I think what most of them miss is the social interaction. Whether it's hey, how's the family, and ripping each other a little bit just for fun, or seeing a game and commenting on that. It's the life part of it that I think people miss more than virtually anything else. So from a mental health perspective, I think it gets back to resilience and productivity models. I mean, what are you doing to balance yourself? How are you keeping your energy up? How are you taking care of yourself physically? Are you eating the right things? I don't recall talking to any of my staff about many of those things in February, and I find myself talking pretty regularly about it today. So I think that's the biggest part of it, I think, Elmer, for me.
I think one of the most attractive aspects to recording these conversations, and the reason why so many GMC members have tuned in, is to get a little bit of a different portion of their colleagues' thinking. And so I'd love to hear, what I just heard you describe was a change in your management and a change in your leadership, and you recognizing the need to consider the personal as part of professional productivity. What other aspects of your management and leadership have changed?
That's another great question.
We're on a roll today.
Yeah. Wow, keep them coming. From a productivity standpoint, I think it's interesting, and this whole issue of balance is one of the things that I've learned during this time, because early on, during the PPP days, the early PP days, I found myself waking up really early, turning the computer on because it was convenient. It was right here. A lot of times it was before I got my first cup of coffee, and I'd get my coffee and I'd just start working. And, pretty soon I found myself working, into dusk, and not having a whole lot of downtime. I think it's really easy to do that work that seems immediate and seems urgent. But I think you really have to break out those two things, because, there's a big difference between things that need to be done urgently and that work that is truly important. And so I found myself, categorizing work as best I can into what's urgent, what's important, what's not urgent, what's not important. And quickly I came across, you remember Stephen Covey?
Yes, Seven
Stephen
Habits.
Covey wrote a book a long time ago, and he had these 4 quadrants of urgent and important. And so I found myself utilizing that framework. And what I quickly realized is that what I was doing a lot of was stuff that needed to be done urgently, and stuff that seemed important. And now what I find myself doing is more critical thinking to strategy. And if you can start thinking more strategically, you can start creating workflows around what's urgent, what's important, get rid of the things that are perhaps important but somebody else could do, and focus on kind of midterm, long term. So, now, near, far, as opposed to now. And I found, at least for me, I mean, that will be a skill that transfers back with me in a return to office environment.
So I wouldn't be doing my job well if I didn't ask for you to translate that into something, explicit and actionable for, the much smaller businesses who might not have had the balance sheets to easily survive the downtimes, and are trying to figure out how to exist in this new economy, and how to, I use the phrase survive and thrive. So I think that concentration, that focus on reflection and being strategic is really important. But what are the 2 or maybe 3 questions that you might suggest in order to identify those plans or that work?
Yeah, wow. That is a very complicated question, but I'll try to answer it as best I can. I mean, I think, utilizing the framework that we just talked about, if you characterize what's happened in the last 8 weeks as an anomaly, and I think you'd have to some degree call it an anomaly, because in February most of us were still planning on building new buildings and buying new equipment and maybe putting new staff on, because the economy was in pretty good shape. March hits, and all of a sudden, government mandated shutdown. And unlike the supply side disruptions that we had seen during the tariff wars, this was a complete demand shock. In some industries, revenue went to zero. And as we were having conversations with clients, it's okay, let's plan for, what business looks like absent PPP, because PPP is a band-aid. It's not a long-term solution to your capital stack. It's how long does this last for you, and how far beyond 8 weeks can we see, and what decisions would you make today if this 8 week time frame turned into 8 months? And so, I think from a strategic thinking standpoint, it's got to be now. I mean, we'll use that as the framework. We'll call it now, near, far, right? Now is, gee, I think it's going to last 8 weeks. What do I need to do now to make sure that 8 weeks from now, assuming the economy comes back, I'm in a good position? So, for some it was, how do I make sure the supply side, there aren't any disruptions on the supply side? So as I get supply, raw materials and things, can I make the product to accommodate demand downstream? So two, what is demand downstream in an environment where the government has shut down demand? Theoretically. So I think that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is, post June, how long do we think it's going to last? Well, gee, if it's going to be another 4 to 6 months, do I have enough capital? Do the suppliers that exist in March, are they going to exist in July? Are the consumers still going to want my product, 8 weeks from now? I think the answer to that is yes. So it becomes mostly a supply chain issue and a capital issue. How long can I burn cash and come out the other side and be okay for the next, foreseeable 4 months? And then long term, I still think you can't give up the long term strategic plan. And part of that, I think, some of the thinking has to be accelerated into the now as to capital. Do I have the right sources of capital to take me well into the future? And if not, how do I talk to the bank or other equity or debt sources to make sure that I shore up capital, as I move forward in an uncertain environment? I think the government has done, a nice job. I mean, in dealing with something that's really, really uncertain. I think we can all be critical on how it's been communicated, and certainly the SBA process was a lot more clunky than many of us had hoped for. But I think at the end of the day, I think we all helped, and I'm not just talking about BMO. I think the Southeast Wisconsin banded together from a banking standpoint, and listen, we were the conduit. The SBA gave us a program to administer, so that our employers or our clients could keep as many employees on the books as possible. And I think we did that. I think the banks did a really, really nice job in Southeast Wisconsin. So hopefully I answered the question.
You did, and
Okay.
I appreciate that so much. So, we'd be remiss if we didn't include some talk about the PPP in this conversation. But I'm going to make it a little easier for you. It was a complicated program, rolled out very, very quickly to pretty great effect. And I've had numerous conversations with organizations, including ours, who are able to survive because of it. So let's accept that. But I'll ask you, what's been a PPP story that has been motivating for you, or a success for BMO that you think is worth sharing with the rest of us?
Yeah, well, there's dozens of them, Elmer. I mean, I think, listen, I think, I think some of the early days were horror. So, remember the early days where, that Friday the SBA was going to turn on the site, except that, the pipe of connectivity was like this.
Hmm.
And so I don't think we processed our first PPP loan until that Sunday. So 2 days later. But then we got our Gallup about us, and we were able to produce, and put a lot through the system. And within an hour of some of the clients getting notice that they had confirmed SBA loans, I mean, you should see the notes that came back. I mean, I talked to one client that literally was crying. They were sobbing on the phone, talking about the importance of this money and what it meant to keeping people, gainfully employed. And there are dozens of stories like that, Elmer, where I mean, companies were going through a lot of pain. They still are. And so this was a real raw issue for virtually everybody. And what was cool for me, Elmer, is, I mean, the client side was really impactful, and I would share those stories with our staff. And our staff was putting in really long hours, kind of throughout the clock, to crank out as many of these as we could. And I found that our staff was really motivated to do the next one and the next one and the next one after that. And so I think in all, I think we had something like a couple hundred emails that we shared with staff, and it was just it was a really cool time.
I really, really love hearing that. And frankly, I should share with you that uh, being ready to take in applications 2 days after the launch, and we know the actual moments of launch were soft at best. I think you should be impressed with yourself, and that's extraordinary. I'd love to ask you, as a GMC member, you get to be an influential and impactful member of the greater Milwaukee community. And I'd love to hear both how you have engaged in that since the shutdown, and what you might challenge other GMC members to consider and to actually do um, while we are adjusting to life as it's going to be.
Yeah, another good question. You got a lot of good questions today, Elmer. You've been working on these. You've been staying
I
up
have,
late.
yeah.
I can tell. I would tell you this, that and whether it's GMC or any organization, I think many of us are on a lot of boards, and I think a lot of those organizations are struggling too. How do we just had a board meeting today, for example, and how do you get the kind of engagement that you otherwise would have if you're all sitting around a room, and you see the facial expressions, you see the expression, you see the emotion with, passion arguments. I think it's really, really critical that we remain engaged. Listen, all of us have bought a ticket, and so now it's up to us to turn in that ticket and actually be part of the game. Um, and I think more than ever, the Milwaukee community, again, regardless of whether it's GMC or any other organization, we need to make sure that we're taking a leadership role in making sure the nonprofit community is really, really healthy, because there's an awful lot of really good work that's being done by dozens of agencies that needs to continue, and it can't continue without us. Um, I know that we at GMC are working on a number of programs. Our programs haven't stopped. People are working around the clock to make sure that we can continue to do the good things for the community that we always have. Um, but the same holds true for all the other nonprofit agencies in Metro Milwaukee. So engagement is the one thing I would remind people now more than ever. If you're not part of a group today, get engaged. If you're part of a group today, get engaged.
Fantastic. So now's the really easy part. Uh, I don't know if you've heard that some of our other conversations have concluded with some fun recommendations, reading, cooking, watching. What you been doing at home?
Well, I'm a little bit of a foodie, so I smoke. I like to smoke different meats and bake bread and pizzas, all on the grill. So I have this
Wow.
gigantic big green egg, and so I do a lot of that. I think the other maybe two more things. The family gets together now. It's really cool for me because my oldest son Asher is a freshman at Madison, and so he's been with us now for the last 2 months, and we never would have had that. He would have been at school, and we wouldn't have seen him. And so it's been cool for me to see how him back at home. The fifth chair around the table is now occupied. The dogs aren't trying to figure out where he is anymore, and the interaction with the other two kids has been great. So we're playing a lot of board games, Monopoly, Risk, some new card games that Asher, my oldest, figured out while he was at college. Not drinking games, but actual card games. And the last thing is books. I try to read 10 pages a day of books, and if I do that, then I read something like 10 books a year. And for me, my attention span is good. I'm good for about a half hour. So 10, 12 pages is really good for me. But there's some really great books out there. And so I encourage everybody to take a page out of that and just read a little bit. You don't have to sit down and read a book from cover to cover, but boy, if you read 10 pages a day, it's about a book a month.
That goes pretty quickly. But you got to make a recommendation. You already mentioned Stephen Covey. That's a famous one. But what have you read in the last year or so that you think this is this is something that should be everybody's on everyone's bookshelf?
Well, I tell you what, there are a couple books by Peter Zehan, The Accidental Superpower
Mm.
and The Absolute Superpower, and they're a little bit heady from an economic standpoint, but both talk about the oil, kind of the race for oil dominance, and it's been really cool to see what's happened in the U.S. over the last call it 5 years, or I should say North America over the last 5-10 years, and as we're seeing more energy independence out of the U.S. and North America, you can kind of see how conflicts may change in the world in the coming years. So I think that's been those have been two pretty good books that I've read recently.
I love it. So after this, I'm going to follow up with you, and I'm going to try to convince you to share with us a good recipe. And I just wanted to make sure I'd said that while we were recording it, so everyone knows that I can hold you accountable for that.
I can tell you an easy one right now if you want.
Yeah, give it to us. Oh,
Can you? Oh, hold on. I just screwed this up.
yeah, I can't see you while you're.
All right, I'll keep talking though, because it's. Oh, here we go. You see me okay?
I can.
All right. So bacon. This is bacon. This is just put a pound of bacon on a baking sheet, oven at 375. Sprinkle just a little bit of brown sugar over the bacon.
Mm.
After 10 minutes, flip the bacon. 10 minutes later, best bacon you've ever had. In fact, the Milwaukee Bucks in their grand opening had millionaire bacon. That's what it tastes like. It's awesome.
And with that, Dave, thank you so much for making some time. It's been great talking to you, and I'm looking forward to being in your office, visiting your new space, and being in person with you, hopefully soon.
You're welcome. Thanks for spending some time with us, Elmer.
It's been fantastic.
Appreciate it.